stark mountains with sparkling lochs and rivers, the remote beauty of Scotland's northwest and the spiritual heart of the Highlands. Running from the hills of Sutherland and Wester Ross down to the Great Glen, the far north may be geographically isolated, but for one group in society, it is God's own country. For the modern exploratory climber, this is Shangri-La.
Superb. Should get a good day. Must have been fine.
Paul Nunn and Clive Rowland begin a 2-hour trek towards the isolated peak Ben Jarek. With the passing years, rucksacks don't get any lighter.
Christ, if we put some house bricks in here? Well, we'll swap it round with it too up. So either that or your wallet.
In the 60s, both men climbed with Tom Patey, who judged mountaineers by their drive and determination. Paul Nunn and Clive Rowland fit that description perfectly.
We had this real lust for adventure.
Yeah.
Even when we were youngsters. I remember he was just 18 and I was 17, and we were sat in the front room at my mum's, and we were planning doing the first bridge descent of the Eiger, the north face of the Eiger. I mean, that's how keen we were.
And also recognise that some of these north faces, like the Matterhorn, you know, it's stupid to do them in the summer. You know, they should be winter climbs.
Rowland and Nunn have been winter climbing ever since. In midwinter, when it's snowing, the sky is leaden and the wind is blowing hard. Climbing in Scotland's northern outpost is only for the truly committed. But that is the challenge Paul and Clive have long found irresistible.
We had an ancient Austin. It took us 2 days because the A9 north of Perth was bad enough. But then from Inverness north, it was all single track. So, yeah, the whole thing was just one big adventure. We just used to walk and walk and walk and look around and find often big new cliffs, virtually untouched.
The Glen Squabe cliffs were a case in point. Hardly anyone had been on Ben Jarek's northern face until Paul Nunn came here in 1970. At the time, he described the route novelly as an ice tube climb with 2 major pitches and sections of steep snow. And so began the first ascent of Emerald Gully.
Good stance here, Paul. I'll try and get a belay.
In Scottish Mountaineering Club guidebooks, Emerald Gully is a Grade 4 route. With nearly vertical ice sections, it remains as good a test of a climber's technique as it was when Paul Nunn made the first ascent.
We went up actually just looking for a new climb, and we'd been told there was something to do there. There was a big ice fall, and Tom Patey had said that. But we went on a fairly poor day, you know, when we couldn't go on a big hill, couldn't go up onto Amchelek, or because it was snowing and it was a pretty cloudy day. In fact, during that whole day, that first ascent, we didn't see much, and my memories of it are very, very hazy.
Which didn't help Paul when it came to repeating the climb for our cameras. In bad weather with unpredictable ice, his progress was arm-makingly slow.
Sometimes you can judge ice just, you know, by looking and planting your tools in the best places where the ice is of the right consistency. That wasn't that easy. It was a new coating of snow that had covered the whole surface. So there were splintery parts that you were trying to fix it, get the axe into, and it was plating off. And you got some of the steeper sections were plating a bit. So I mean that made me feel a little bit nervous about it. There was quite a steepish traverse out. I mean, goodish for, you know, a proper bit of climbing. With it was just at that point where the axes were going in and the ice was fracturing a bit, you know, just where you didn't want it. And then there's a vertical or near vertical section, you know, quite steep section. Vertical means about 65 degrees in climbing terms. And you had to watch your toe, you know, your crampon points, that you didn't fracture the ice off. Because it was brittle, there was a possibility of your feet coming off. And, you know, it's okay 1 foot coming off, but if the tools aren't too good and 2 feet come off, then it can get quite exciting. The middle section of the climb, of course, above that, there's a long, fairly straightforward section, but rather exposed. It's easy technically, but there's no protection on it. You run virtually the whole rope out. I was sort of not trying not to look too often as climb was going on. I thought it might be a bit unnerving. It didn't actually feel terribly difficult that original time. We didn't start till 2 in the afternoon.
That's pretty late.
Yeah, and because you know it was supposed to be a short day out.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit late. I think it might have been 8 o'clock when we got off the top then, and it was very, very dark. But nevertheless, you know, I mean, it didn't feel too bad the first ascent. I was amazed by how high the aspect seemed yesterday. It all seemed very steep and seemed to have laid up in between the years between.
Is that not just being 25 years older?
I think that's probably something to do with it.
The quickening pace of exploration in the Northwest Highlands is more obvious in summer, when the hunger for unclimbed rock can turn an obscure outcrop into a major climbing area almost overnight. The Ardmere Crags near Ullapool had been virtually ignored until the summer of '89. Then suddenly there were more than 70 new routes, many of them claimed by the formidable team of Andy Cunningham and Alan Fife.
Okay, yep, ready to go. I'm watching. You're watching. Okay. And we've got the pod slightly higher to the right.
This is the first route Alan Fife tackled at Ardmere. The piratical-looking Fife called it Primitive Dance, a 100-foot climb up an obvious crack on a formidable buttress, which is hard on both hands and legs.
This crag is on the way to a place called Reef, where there's a lot of sea cliffs. And a lot of people used to drive along the road to go climbing there. And you'd look up and you could actually see the buttress in profile. And for years I said, I must go up there and have a look. And then on one occasion there was bad weather over in the Aviemore way, and we decided to take a look, come up here. So we parked at the bottom, came up, and the rock to begin with doesn't look all that great, but as you come up the hill it's better and better. And we left our sacks at the bottom of Primitive Dance and sort of walked along underneath the cliff, and it kept getting bigger and better, and a bit like kids in a toy shop, you know. And we eventually rushed back, and Primitive Dance was the first route we did.
Yeah.
Traditionally, first ascensionists name their new routes. Cunningham and Fife are good at this. Titles like Houdini and Jailbreak suggest an ability to get out of tight corners.
Get some good stuff up here. Yeah, I'll just find them first.
I was intending to climb a crack just to the left of Primitive Dance, and I sort of leapt onto the arête, which looked to have a good few holds on it, climbed up about 10 feet, and then I had to jump off because the first lesson was it a lot steeper than it looks. And then we started up the corner, which I found very hard, quite hard. And then after that it was following more or less the line of the crag. And it just gave us a taste for the climbing. It was very varied climbing, pretty well protected, and all sorts of techniques, bridging, jamming, laybacking. It was just good climbing, really enjoyable. And the situation, the setting makes it unique. Superb, looking out to the Summer Isles there. Just a great place to be.
After a winter of snow and ice climbing, Alan Fife is showing good early season form on the rocks. But even someone with his vast experience feels the physical strain as he fights his way up and gives his companion, Andy Cunningham, a bit of a fright.
There you go. Added excitement. Don't scare me like that. Eh? Looks good. Oh, aye. Looks even better now than up here. Okay. It will be This one on that, that's new.
Oh, dry again. Did you leave that for fright, that, eh?
In the restless search for new routes, climbers become very protective of their favourite patches. It's a kind of territorial imperative.
That thing coming up.
Rab Anderson in Edinburgh, he happened to be going on about how many good routes he'd done recently, and I couldn't resist saying, well, we've got a crag ourselves actually, it's up in the northwest, and it's really great, it's near the road and all the rest. And Rab said, has it got a big roof with a crack through it? And I paused too long to say no, and says yes. So he said he was very busy anyway in other things, other projects, but sure enough, the next time I was up here, Rab appeared. So it was a bit of a race on for routes after that.
Yeah.
Here, most routes are very hard indeed, but the views are superb. For my excursion on rock, I found something slightly easier.
Okay, Cameron, right, go for it, man.
Climbing.
This is Terrace Crack, my first climb of the season, so I got Andy Cunningham to lead the route.
Looks like quite a deep crack, that.
Yeah, it is. Ideal for jams.
There's a lot of jamming here on Ardmere, isn't there?
There is, it's actually a great place to hone up your jamming technique. Either that or get a lot of scars on the
Thrash
back of
your fingers
hand.
and knuckles, yeah.
Okay, I'll get
You get something in there?
running in here, Cameron.
Good. Something big?
Big hex here.
Yeah. That looks like it could hold the Queen Mary.
It might do, I hope it holds me as well. Bit green in that one. So. Okay, that's got me for this next route.
Like, it's a fairly straight route, isn't it? There's not a lot of bending in it.
The crack widens a bit here, so we're kind of using the edge a bit more rather than jamming in.
That's the bit that worries me just a bit.
So, you've got to look for your footholds in this bit. There's a small one there. I'll just move on up.
Apart from being slightly easier, is this sort of typical of routes here at Ardmere?
What I've certainly found at Ardmere, from the ground, you may think you're able to estimate a grade of the route. When you actually start climbing it, it's about 2 or 3 grades harder.
Aye.
It's certainly caught us out a few times.
Good handholds, yeah? Good, well done, man.
Okay, Cameron, I'll
Right.
just move back.
Okay.
It's actually one of the first routes climbed here
Really?
by the famous Alan Fife.
Another 5 foot? Oh, well, that's made my day. Okay, that's me, Andy.
Climb when you're ready, Cameron.
Okay, climbing.
20 years ago, a VS climb like this was a respectable grade, but standards have shot up since then, and I, for one, just haven't climbed enough to keep up with them. Different kinds of rock require different techniques. The sandstone of Ardmere makes you use the tiniest of toe holds.
Hey! Good man. That's probably the hardest bit.
Yeah, I'm not saying much because I'm out of breath.
You're looking good, Cameron. Looking good.
A bit of encouragement never comes amiss, particularly when the arms are pumped and the foothold seems smaller than ever.
This is quite nice.
Yeah, just over the top there. That's it.
Just a question, keep moving on this, isn't it?
It is, yes. Yes. Yeah, see if you can get that runner out from that position.
Right.
And then you
Jam
can
this
move.
in. I'm quite into this jamming, actually.
I can tell by the back of your hands.
I'm after the sympathy vote, you see.
An occupational hazard of the jamming technique are the cuts, bruises and bleeding hands you pick up along the way. But they go with this kind of rock. Almost there, and the relief, as always, is intense.
Oh, sneak a little handhold there.
Well done. Now what you want to do now is to come out onto that
Yeah,
left
onto the-
nose there, yeah. Nice step up. And
Okay.
you've cracked it.
Can I grab your feet?
Well
Yeah, terrific.
done. Well done, man.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Yeah, good solid Ardmere heather, eh?
Beyond the bleak moorlands of the Applecross Peninsula lies Torridon with its distinctive sandstone hills. It's become a gathering point for climbers seeking adventure in Scotland's far north. But no account of their exploits would be complete without a guest appearance by the English tax inspector. Mick Fowler has become a legend in these parts, a will-o'-the-wisp who's only seen when putting up difficult new routes. He works to a master plan that begins on Friday night.
You leave London about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and first stop, Marsh Shepherd's Transport Cafe on the A74, head on up the motorway, petrol stop at Perth, another petrol stop at Inverness, the last 24-hour petrol station, and then arrive in Torridon perhaps 4 in the morning, something like that, about 10 hours drive if the roads are good. Depending where we're going, either have an hour or two sleep or get out the car and go for it straight away. I sort of get up to the cliff at as near as possible at first light. Climb for Saturday, get back down to the car, find something to eat. There's a couple of pubs around that you can get a bite to eat in. Collapse fairly early, and get a good night's sleep on the Saturday. Get up 4 or 5 o'clock on the Sunday, straight out on Sunday. The sooner you're out, the better. Soon you start climbing, the sooner you can get back to the car and get back home and get in bed at home. End of weekend.
Once in the mountains, the urban man can shed his inhibitions. There are no rules or regulations. There is simply a snow-clad cliff, an iced-up waterfall and a route to the top. Mick Fowler has chosen to climb this long sliver of ice on Sgwr a Chwrachin. Many of the greats of Scottish climbing have ventured to the far north, but Mick and his partner Steve Susted are in uncharted territory, making a first ascent.
There are two types of ice screw. Drive-in, that you just hammer in with a hammer, and these screw-in ones, the way to place them is you make a small hole in the ice just with a pick of your ice axe, and then you can screw them in by hand, and they screw in remarkably well. They're hollow, of course. The core of ice comes out the top there. When you're experienced with them, you can feel whether they're good. You know when you're placing them whether or not you're placing a good, solid, reliable piece of protection.
Hopefully not onto me.
What's that?
Sorry?
What's turning out to be useful?
The cave.
Certainly there have been years when we've been up here for 10 or 11 weekends of the winter. But having said that, I mean, you are talking about 4 drivers from London. And when you think about it, it's about 650 miles, something like that, from London to Torridon. So if you look at it in those terms, it's only just over 150 miles each. And as long as you perfect sleeping while the other person's driving, then you can bring it down to reasonable levels, let's say. Although it was a long drive, you could have 2 superb days climbing, get back to work, have 5 days at work, come up the next weekend, and do the same the next weekend. And so, of course, out of what would have been a week, in other words, the weekend plus the days in between, you get 4 good days climbing in and have no time off work.
It's a persuasive argument which puts Mick Fowler in his own tax bracket. Play as you earn, or Schedule B for burning the candle at both ends. But who cares? With his front-pointed trampons biting into the ice, Mick is in his climbing heaven, focused on the task ahead. With the sound of his ice axe reverberating around the hills, Mick will call this route Triple Echo.
As a superb pure ice route. You saw a good 40-50 metres ice pitch, quite steep, quite a difficult one to place any sort of rock protection, and the ice was a bit bubbly, quite a lot of sort of pockets of air within the ice, which means that when you're placing ice screws, they're not really as solid as you would like them to be. You can feel that you've gone through a solid piece of ice, then through a bit of air, then into some ice again. So it's a bit worrying from that point of view, but managed to get quite a good peg runner in the rock just to the right of the sort of really impressive ice umbrella, of course, at the top there. So that made me feel a lot happier for I actually sort of climbed up the right-hand side of the umbrella, which of course was pretty fragile and very impressive from right underneath. Very translucent, you could see right the way through.
Yeah! Yeah, I'm a happier man.
Chat, Steve?
Yeah?
I'm sort of bashing the edge of it away a bit, so...
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye out.
Tom Patey once said there were 3 things a good climber should never do. He shouldn't fall off, he shouldn't lose the route, and he shouldn't waste time. Perhaps we can add a 4th, something you should do. Use your head.
Not too much.
Chat, Steve?
It's now a matter of how much I dare climb on top of it. It's quite interesting if the whole thing went.
The motivation is certainly the physical pleasure of climbing, the fact that it keeps you fit, healthy. Nothing else inspires me to keep fit, I must admit. I'm not the sort of person who goes into a gym to exercise. But the outdoors does give me the urge. I do very much enjoy rushing around the hills and climbing up steep pieces of ice. Yeah, it's maybe some would say it's a perversion of mine. Others will understand completely.
Many mountaineers believe that climbing is a natural act. You become fit for climbing by climbing. And whilst many now train on indoor walls, such a controlled environment is anathema to the likes of Mick Fowler. It's the natural world that matters to him. So what's the attraction of this kind of steep, sustained and daring climbing? What is it that brings someone like Mick Fowler here weekend after weekend during the dark months of winter? What motivates a man like him?
It's a challenge, really, of can you do it, and the satisfaction of doing it. Of course, it's also the exploration of the unknown. Perhaps that's a bit of a strong way of putting it, but the joy of climbing new routes is a sort of exploratory pleasure to a certain extent.
And for Mick Fowler, the Scottish Northwest offers wide scope for that exploratory zeal.
I like there to be a definite line, as opposed to trying to follow a snowed-up summer rock line. And I like it to be in a remote and beautiful part of the country. And the Northwest, the Isle of Skye, all the way up the northwest coast of Scotland just fits in so exactly with that.
Okay, Steve! Take me off!
Another climb completed, another new route, and all in the very best place in Scotland.